Yo, Kev here from Aquaman Beats, and I have a breakdown on how I mix female vocals into a track. Today I'll be working in Logic Pro X, and I'll be mixing the vocals of my good friend and fellow artist, Petra. Let us begin. And so the first thing that I wanted to do was actually grab these 4 tracks here, drag them on over into Logic Pro. Now these 4...
I revere this life in hope. I revere this life. I revere this life in hope.
Lastly, I have this harmony here.
I revere this life in hope.
I want to mention it's really helpful if you're working with a vocalist of any sort as a producer, engineer, artist, etc., or if you're a vocalist yourself, just to give extra little follies and add-in noises at the beginning of your take. It really helped to just glue it all together. And I gave extra sounds later on just to mix in for the intro and towards the bridge in the end. All right, so what I'm gonna go ahead and do is start out by mixing the vocals into the instrumental. So we'll go ahead and get a section of the instrumental running. And I like to work from the bottom up, so I'll start with the volume at a low and then I'll bring it up until it sits nice with my ears. And I'm listening in on headphones just so you all know.
May our struggles bring us gold. I'm one step closer to where I'm gonna be. I'm one step further each time I lose a moment.
You'll see most of these vocals are hitting around negative 12 dB, with the exception of a few going over, under, but this is kind of a very common area for it, and that's ultimately what's sounding good. So we'll go ahead and keep this vocal. I'm going to go ahead and mute it, and then I'm going to move on to the second vocal and mix that into place, our first and second background. But just keep in mind that throughout my normal process, I would actually reference back in by bringing in the main vocal, checking if it sounds good with the backups, muting it, trying the harmony with the backup, etc. And let's go ahead and move over into the second vocal. Now I like that right there because this is a backup vocal and it's just going to be coming out, sitting right in the back behind this here.
I revere this life in
It's pretty solid and, just enough to support the main one, but not so much to drown it out. We're going to do the same thing with the third vocal here. It's good for that. Let's move over to the harmony now. All right, now let's go ahead and give them a listen as one. What I did was I went ahead and grouped these as well. So if you can't see below, there's one called Liz Group, and I actually went ahead and took all 4 of those and moved them on over. There was an extra, but I didn't end up using it because it's just an extra. But the more the merrier, the more to scan through and find out which ones you want to use to shape your sound. So yeah, we'll go ahead and listen to them all together.
I revere this life in hope. May our struggles bring us gold.
Now I'm going to go ahead and go into panning. So for this part of the process, I'm going to go ahead and mute the main instrumental.
Revere this life in hope. May our struggles bring us gold.
Now I know for these 2 right here in particular, these backups, I'm going to want them to be brought to the side so they kind of sound like they're surrounding the vocals. So let's just go ahead and isolate the main.
I revere this life in hope.
Let's bring this here. I usually like to set them around 30 or 40. We'll just push it all the way.
I revere this life in hope.
See, like that versus this. Right here, they're kind of just together. Now you have dimension, and that's cool when you can get more dimension. We're going to throw this one to the opposite side. Because remember, these are all a lot of the same take, more or less, but they're just done subtly differently. So they're not going to be in phase, and at the same time, they're just going to be lending a supporting role to the main vocal.
I revere this life in ho.
We go sounding a lot better, and then we'll throw the harmony just hanging out there. I'm going to leave that one dead center too.
I revere this life in ho.
All right, now that we've got that taken care of, I'm going to go ahead and show you a bit of what I threw on the chains for these. What I went ahead and did for the group of all of it, I went ahead and put a slight multi-presser on there. And all that's really doing, when I turn it on, all that's really doing
I revere this life in ho.
is just slightly touching on each of the tips of these vocals in as a whole in the group, but it's actually touching on each frequency spectrum. So the lows, the mids, the high mids, and the highs. But there are some highs there that are kind of piercing, so it helped to kind of bring those down. And then what I put secondarily on the group is I put an EQ. In this case, I actually put the EQ after the compression. I ultimately just knew I wanted a lot of low end taken off at the end of the whole chain. So I went ahead and rolled off it to about 116 hertz, and I'll show you before and after.
I revere this life in ho. May our struggles bring.
You're really not going to notice it much, but the reality is when this all adds up back into the instrumental, back into any other vocals that might be going on, any other tones in the beat, in the instruments, any high or low, they all stack up in that low end, and they end up sounding kind of ugly and mushy. You know, it's generally what makes our mixes not as clear. So taking those out of the vocals alone really, really helps. And I like to do that on a group in this case. Then for the main, which I did most work on, I'll go ahead and bring that one in real quick and show you the different chains that I like to put on it. So first things first is I put a gate, and that's ultimately just coming in here, and here, let's mute out these other ones real quick. This gate is actually just coming in whenever the audio itself reaches below negative 33 dB. It begins to come on and basically create more silence within the track itself. So when you get into like these little low angles here, like before she comes in, or down in here at the very tip, or like in here, you want it to be more silent, or maybe at least for this track. And just went ahead and added that in. So let's see without.
This life in ho.
Now with.
I revere this life in ho. May our struggles.
The next thing I wanted to add was an EQ, again, just to reemphasize, taking that low end off. This one's a hard walled, and I rolled the low end off around 95 hertz. Then I jumped into a multipressor for this one as well. Let's see what I went ahead and did with it.
I revere this life in ho.
Kind of taking more out of that 200 range, that 1 to 200 range.
Struggles bring us gold.
Also a little bit off of the upper mid range. Then I went ahead and put on a regular compressor. So generally with my compressors, I'll take the threshold. I'll keep a ratio of about like anywhere from 2 to 1, 3 to 1, depending on the vocal take. And I'll take the threshold and I'll actually run it down. This number does not matter. Like ultimately, it's always going to change because your vocal is always going to be coming in a different volume. But ultimately, what I look for is if it needs it. Sometimes you get really good vocalists that don't actually need much compression at all. In which case, it's great, right? And then other times, it may not even be the vocalist really. It could just be the sense that they have a lot more fluctuation in the dynamics of their tone and their voice and their volume, etc. But I generally, if I'm going to bring any compression in on a vocal, I generally look for about negative 6 dB. So basically meaning that the compressor itself is taking hold of about 6 dB and kind of bringing it down into a relative volume with the rest of the vocal coming through. So just kind of putting it into a tighter space, if you would. And then I brought the gain up about 7.5 dB, basically giving it about 1.5 over what I brought it down. So really subtle changes, but overall, like, these things definitely have an effect as you add them up throughout the chain. Then I also brought an exciter in, which more or less just brings a like slight harmonic enriching or saturation, as they say, I did the 10,000 hertz range. And then I went ahead and threw a de-esser on. A de-esser basically just pulls off any harsh things like that. And I just brought it on so that it's hitting subtly. Let's go ahead and give a listen to where we're at.
I revere this life in hope.
Whenever it's hitting that yellow, you know it's actually taking a much stronger. Go ahead, and I threw this last EQ on, and this last EQ, I just throw an EQ on the end of nearly every one of my channels, at least as I'm working with the audio, and I like to throw the analyzer on, and then in this case I put the 10 decibels right at the center. Sometimes I'll put it down to 0, and that will just allow the decay of it to hang on, so it allows me to monitor the audio post-processing.
I revere this life in hope. May our struggles bring us gold.
This is really helpful when you want to compare to other mixes and see if your vocals are sounding good, or why something might not be sounding as consistent with another part that you did. It's a great way to analyze and compare. Let's go ahead and show what I did for reverb. So I have 2 different reverbs and 1 delay. I'll go over those real quick and let you know what those were. More or less did something that was like large and bright as my primary. Then I did something a bit smaller and tight, just to kind of give more like close proximity feel. And then went ahead and did a quarter note delay. First one I brought in just enough to kind of give some body.
This life in hope.
This one's the bit tighter one.
I revere this life in hope.
That one's really subtle. You might only be able to hear it if you listen over headphones, but again, like I said, very subtle things all along the way throughout the chain are going to add up to a really beefy outcome. But yeah, we'll go ahead and show the delay.
I revere this life in hope. May our struggles bring us gold.
You'll hear it whenever it stops or comes to a lower point. Again, like I said, subtle things all stacking up to create one hopefully beautiful saturated image. But yeah, then we'll go ahead and throw all those on together. Give it a listen.
I revere this life in hope.
All right, and then I did alternate change-ups throughout each of the vocals. I'll leave that up to you and your creative freedom as you're working on your track. But generally for the background vocals, in this case, I actually went less. Sometimes on the background vocals, I'll get a little bit more heavy with the effects, reverb, delay. But I didn't really go too crazy on this one. I kind of wanted that main one to carry more of the effects for whatever reason. And it's, it's always going to change. There's no, this is art, right? There's a science to it, but it's art first. And in art, you always leave room for adjustment. And really in science too. So, hey, let's go with that. We move on over to the background vocal. And I'll just give you a quick breakdown of what I did for those as far as the chain is concerned. So I just basically put, we'll listen to it raw. After.
I revere this life in hope.
That's sounding more like techy and like boxy, in that mid to high range. And with female vocals, particularly tenor dudes, you're gonna have a higher range frequencies that embellish the nature of their vocal more. I did more or less the same with the harmony as well, but with the harmony, let's give them all a listen together. I'm just gonna keep the main muted for now. Now that sounded cool. No effects on, by the way, but that sounded cool. And I think I put a slight roll end on the high end, just because it was kind of coming through a little sizzly. But one thing that really brought this together in glue, because I didn't do too much on the makeup gain for that compressor either, was this spread here. And this tool is great within Logic, really powerful tool. More or less, if I could explain it in a gist without getting too technical, what's going on with the frequencies when you use a spreader is you could see like this low end, this is like 20 to 50 hertz. And then, up here ranging into the thousands, your low, your mid, your high. This is basically pulling that range of frequency over to the left. And then this one to the right, this range to the left, this range to the left, this range to the right, etc. And you have all different types of these in here, and you can even customize and create your own with these meters. But more or less, this just spreads out the frequency image of the sound that you're processing or working on. And so what it allows to do, this is a before.
I revere this life in hope.
This is after.
May our struggles bring us gold.
Let's go ahead and isolate the sound so you can hear it a little bit more defined too.
I revere this life in hope. I revere this life in hope.
Makes a huge difference when you're trying to run a bunch of vocals at once and trying to get them to sound a little bit more distinguished and gelled. It's complicated because they're taking up a lot of the same frequency areas, and so to be able to throw them off into a little bit harder left, a little bit harder right here and there on different parts of the frequencies is very beneficial when you're trying to do it all. When you're trying to mix a bunch of sounds like that, it just helps. So yeah, more or less, that is what I do. I'll turn the effects on. We will bring them all back together, and let's just give a listen firstly to all the vocals stacked up, and then I'll run it back with the instrumental. And yeah, that's that.
I revere this life in hope. May our struggles bring us gold.
And with the instrumental, and I'll also throw in my backup vocals that I put on the hook. Oh, and let me turn my mastering chain on as well.
I revere this life in hope. May our struggles bring us gold.
So that's my breakdown on how I mix vocals into a song. Follow my channel for more videos like this, and if you need some fresh new beats or a song mix, check the links in my caption or bio. Have a creatively productive day.